You're new, right? Well, we're glad to have you. Have you tried the fries yet? It was the question everyone had been asking me since I started work at the facility. I wasn't enthusiastic about eating lunch there. For a number of reasons. Firstly, my work, I cut up fish corpses for science. You can get used to the smell, brine, formaldehyde, dead fish, cleaning solution, but you never really get it out of your nose. Secondly, cafeterias attached to laboratories like this one had always grossed me out. In theory, I know that the food stays separate from our preserved canisters of deep-sea creatures. But in practice, I can't stop imagining slimy black eels in the gallon jugs of ketchup and dead anglerfish floating in the soda machine. Ridiculous. I know even hospitals full of infectious diseases have their own cafeterias, right? But even after a week of working at the facility, I still hasn't set foot in the dining hall. Social pressure is a hell of a drug. I didn't want to be known as the weird new guy who ate his sandwich outside with the seagulls every afternoon. Besides, the whole lab went to the cafeteria. If I didn't join, I'd never get to know any of my coworkers. And so I found myself washing my hands twice, sighing, trying to make my reflection in the staff bathroom mirror look less paranoid and strange. I didn't even have to eat anything, I told myself. I could just sip a drink and socialize. With a final deep breath, I left the restroom and pushed open the door to the laboratory dining hall. It seemed clean at least, and I liked that. It didn't have that harsh chemical smell so common in facilities like ours, but the stainless steel surfaces practically sparkled. I'd underestimated the number of researchers at the facility. Workers with rubber gloves and hairnets scurried between the huge tables, carrying trays of food. Instead of the slop I remembered from high school, plates were piled high with fresh and colorful foods. Today's menu was tandoori chicken with roast vegetables or vegetarian lasagna with chopped greens. Both meals included fries and a drink. I stuck to my plan of just grabbing a coffee, but I tried to sneak a peek into the prep area, too. A squat, white-haired chef planted herself right between me and the kitchen, so squarely that I wondered if she was blocking my view on purpose. And was that suspicion in her eyes? I told myself I was just being paranoid. I should just focus on my coffee. As I poured it, though, I yelped and nearly scolded myself. Something was swimming in the pot. It flicked its black fin tail and vanished into the brown murkiness. Or did it? I looked again. Swirled the pot. Swished the coffee left and right. Nothing. A bald guy from finance, Chris or Chuck or something, cleared his throat behind me, lifting an empty mug. I filled it and left the pot empty, with no nameless creature flopping around inside. I had to make myself get over this. On impulse, I grabbed a tray of tandoori chicken and vegetables. At the end of the line, a server stopped me. I reached for my credit card. "No honey, it's free if you work here." She looked me over. "I seen you round. But you ain't got any fries. Them's the best part." I looked around at all the signs promoting golden piles of fries. "I'm just not that hungry, I guess." "Suit yourself," she rolled her eyes and waved me on. It was weird how much the cafeteria seemed to be pushing them. Maybe they were the cheapest thing to make. Maybe management put them up to it. But fried food upset my stomach. And you couldn't always tell what it had been before. I thought of the thing in the coffee pot and shuddered. My coworkers practically cheered when they saw me. "We thought you'd never make it." Dante, my boss, seemed to be in a rare good mood. He gave my shoulder a squeeze. "Welcome to the lunch crew." I saw a lot of familiar faces over the heaping plates of fries. The positive energy was contagious. I'd walked into the lunchroom wondering if I could make one friend at my new job. I left it feeling like I'd made several. The truth was that moving to a new city and starting this new job at the facility was stressing me out more than I was willing to admit, even if I was finally working in the field I'd been fascinated by since I saw Blue Planet as a kid. Around the lunch table, though, I felt like maybe this could be my place. I was still stressed, but I didn't feel so alone. At least until I fell asleep early that evening. The thing is, you're always alone in your nightmares. In this one, I was alone in the vast stainless steel cafeteria, wearing the white uniform, gloves, and hairnet of the lunchroom staff. Something was dripping in the kitchen. I had to stop the leak. Where was everyone? Something scuffled behind me, but when I turned, the tables waited empty and still, almost like they were willing me forward. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. Drip. Drip. I passed by the drink machines and behind the buffet. I didn't recognize a lot of the machinery in the kitchen, especially the 3 huge steel cylinders on the wall. The lid was removed from one. Something leaked from its pipes. Drip. Drip. Soon I'd be close enough. Close enough to know what was in the vast, the source of the dripping. I leaned over the rim. I woke up screaming. I had to get over this ridiculous phobia. My whole new life was at stake. The next day at lunch, I added a heap of fries beside my hamburger. "Hunter!" Dante shouted over the din. "You've been working with the new samples, right?" "I am," I replied. "And this organism is different from other deep-sea life in a lot of ways." I was thrilled to be talking about my work, so much so that I forgot to eat. My co-workers ran off to a meeting, leaving with my plate of, now cold, hamburger and fries. I reached for the burger. The fries started squirming like tentacles, inky black and slimy. The meat of my burger flopped like a reanimated tissue sample, one of the gray bits of skin I examined beneath my microscope. I pushed myself away from the table with the screen, my food went flying across the floor. "Everything all right?" The white-haired chef bent down beside me. I mumbled an apology and scurried out of the cafeteria. That night I dreamed I was swimming in a lightless metal tank, so cramped it was suffocating. In the morning, my sheets were soaked with, what I hoped was, sweat. I felt tired, feverish. I struggled to concentrate on my work. When was the last time I'd eaten? More importantly, where were the rest of the researchers in my lab? Around noon, Dante stuck his head in the lab door. "Hey Hunter. Want to come for lunch?" I thought of fish entrails and spaghetti thin worms writhing beneath the seafloor. I had to bring a hand to my mouth to hold in the vomit. "Are you feeling alright?" I kept my teeth gritted and mumbled an excuse. When he finally left, I let fly into the trash can. I found myself relieved that nothing was staring back at me from the chunky yellow mess I'd made. I went home early that day, and spent 2 more days in bed with fever and delirious dreams. But my experiments were time-sensitive. I had to get back to the facility. Instead of the lab, however, I found myself hurrying to the cafeteria. I still couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten, but I had to know what was in those meals. If I could just find out, it would all make sense. I was sure of it. Ignoring the shouts and warnings of the staff, I pushed my way through to the big metal vats in the kitchen. The white-haired chef charged me, but she was too late. I was already lifting the lid. What I saw inside defied all description. Vampire squid, lampreys, and dissected anglerfish were nothing compared to it. All I could do was stare in horror until I was dragged away. Or so I thought. Later, when the security guard reviewed the camera footage with me, the vat was filled with perfectly ordinary frying oil. "I needed to explain my actions," he said. "I'd upset a lot of people," he said. I didn't have to worry about excuses, however, because a knock at the door called the guard away, leaving me with the still image of myself on the screen, frozen while I screamed at a vat of oil. The guard stayed gone for a while. I slipped out of my chair and pressed my ear to the door to listen in on the conversation outside. Almost like a kind of deep-sea rabies. Brought in by the new specimen. Now believed transmittable to humans. Results in a kind of dread of food, a psychological inability to eat. Subject will probably enter a starvation-induced coma, but will suffer horribly over the feeding tube. And #X200B. I think they're talking about me. Please, I don't want anything pumped into my throat. I don't want to be fed from that horrible creature. Please. And #X200B. xwww.reddit.com web link. My wife and I had just sat down to dinner when we were interrupted first by the sound of the front door knob twisting, then by 3 loud knocks. I stood up from the table and went to the front door, wondering who would have tried the knob first before knocking. My brother maybe, but it was a little late for a visit from him on a weeknight. The sound of the rainstorm outside grew as I opened the door. When I saw her standing on the porch, covered in rain and mud, my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. "Hi Daddy," Sarah said. The way her eyes and nose were scrunched up told me she was crying, even though the rain washed away her tears the second they fell from her eyes. "Can I come inside? It's so cold." I heard something glass shatter in the kitchen, then rushed footsteps. I grabbed my daughter in a tight embrace and began to sob. "Oh my God. You're home," I said. 3 years ago he had reported our daughter missing. We told the police that we had put her to bed one night, and the next morning she was gone. The police found that her bedroom window showed evidence of having been pried open. My wife, Hannah, and I hadn't heard anything that night, and the neighbors all agreed that they hadn't either. What happened next was the largest search party in our small town's history. It's not often 13-year-old girls go missing, especially under such terrible and mysterious circumstances. But despite everyone's best efforts and news reports throughout the state and neighboring states, there was no trace to be found of our little girl. I picked her up and carried her into the house while she sobbed into my neck. I heard my wife turn the corner, let out a small scream, then run to join us in our first complete family hug in 3 years. "What happened?" Hannah asked. "Did anyone follow you here?" "No," Sarah said through her sobs. "I don't know what happened, I just woke up in the dark and started trying to find my way home. I don't know where I was, somewhere in the desert I think, and I just started walking." I set her down and looked at her again. Her hair was long, it probably hadn't been cut since the night we lost her, and the clothes she wore looked like they had been given to her by a homeless person. "Let's get you a hot shower," my wife said. "Are you hungry?" Sarah sniffed and nodded. "Can I have a peanut butter sandwich?" "Anything," my wife said, now choking back tears of her own. "I can't believe you're back." We dressed her in some of Hannah's old clothes, which were still a little large for Sarah. I promised to go to the store first thing in the morning to buy a whole new wardrobe. The rest of the evening was spent with tears and laughter. Hannah and I couldn't believe she was back, and with no recollection of the time between the night she disappeared and when she woke up. Perhaps that much was for the best. After Sarah was asleep, we put her in the office with an air mattress and promises of a new mattress along with her new clothes. I sat outside on the patio with a glass of bourbon in one hand and a cigarette in the other. My wife came outside and softly closed the door behind her. We sat in silence for a moment, then she finally spoke. "What the hell do we do?" Her voice was low and shaky. I shook my head slowly and took a long drag from my cigarette. "I have no idea." "Thank God she doesn't remember anything," Hannah said, taking a sip of the wine she'd brought with her. "You don't think she knows, do you?" "Shhhh," I said sharply, trying to keep my emotions level, which was difficult because I was on the brink of panic myself. "We shouldn't talk about it." She took a sip of her wine and lowered her voice even more so it was just barely above the sound of crickets chirping in the grass. "You don't think she can hear us, do you?" "I don't think so," I answered slowly. "But I didn't think a lot of things before, and look at what happened." We sat again in silence for a long while, both reflecting on the night she disappeared and the lies we told to every police officer and news reporter that came our way. Keeping the lie straight had taken months of practice, but somehow we'd pulled it off. But that wasn't even the hard part. The hard part was keeping the whole plan away from Sarah. The year or so we'd spent planning the whole thing in secret, talking to the neighbors to get their cooperation, all while doing our best to keep the life-changing event as far out of our minds as possible. "She's bound to find out what we did," Hannah said. "We're not so good at keeping things away from her as we used to be." "It's just like riding a bike," I said, hoping more than anything I was right. The fact of the matter was that, 3 years ago, Hannah and I had committed the unforgivable act of filicide. We'd killed our own daughter. The very one that was now 3 years older and slept on an air mattress inside. If that wasn't bad enough, shortly after doing so, for good measure, we had moved across town to get a fresh start and, although we never said it out loud, even to each other, because we were still terrified even though she was gone. We were careful not to list our address on anything, no yellow pages, no direct mailing, nothing. And yet, Sarah still managed to find us. We hadn't wanted to do it. We spent years convincing ourselves that we were in control, that it was just a matter of good parenting. After what happened to the Jarvis boy though, we knew that for the sake of ourselves and everyone around us there was only one thing to do. I took another drag from my cigarette. I hadn't realized until that moment that my hand was shaking, and stared out at the night sky, trying not to think about everything that led up to that night, but being able to think of nothing else. Part 2 www.reddit.com web link